Imagine walking through a bustling metropolis for your entire life. You cross hundreds of intersections, wait at, countless traffic lights, navigate through these sprawling neighborhoods, and suddenly it hits you.
You realize something's missing.
Exactly.
Oh.
You have never, not once, seen a street sign named after a woman.
Yeah, that's a wild realization to have.
It really is. And that geographical erasure, it isn't an accident. It is a deliberate historical edit. It makes you realize that when you look at the grand timeline of treaties and wars and political movements, you are often only seeing the officially sanctioned narrative.
Right, the stuff the winners decided to write down.
Yeah. So what happens when the official history simply decides not to record the lives, the activism, and, well, the struggles of women? Where does all that missing data go?
Well, the absence of a state record certainly doesn't mean an absence of action. I mean, those lives still happen. That activism still shapes nations. But when patriarchal structures dictate the literal mapping of a country or what gets written down in the National Archives, it creates this massive blind spot.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive.
Ugh.
We are going to figure out how to actually see into that blind spot.
Right, using a really fascinating 2026 academic paper from the Conference Journal of Multidisciplinary Studies.
Yeah, it's by researchers Ikram Ben Talla and Brahim Barhoun. The title is Moroccan Female Other Archives: Literary Activism in Fatima Mernissi's Dreams of Trespass and Mhani Alaoui's The House on Butterfly Street.
It's a long title, but the core idea is brilliant. We're looking at how Moroccan women writers use fiction. They aren't just, writing entertaining stories.
No, they're engaging in what the paper calls literary activism.
Exactly. They are literally rewriting erased women back into existence and constructing an alternative archive of the truth.
Okay, let's unpack this, because treating fiction as a historical archive is a pretty radical idea.
It is. But to understand why it's necessary, we have to look at the historical vacuum these authors are writing into. There's a scholar named Swellen Diakonoff who coined a term for this, the myth of the silent woman.
The myth of the silent woman.
Right. Yeah. For decades, there was this prevailing assumption in academic circles that Moroccan women simply didn't have a voice in literature or public life until the 1980s.
Like it just happened overnight.
Exactly. The 1980s were treated as this sudden, spontaneous awakening.
But treating the 1980s as the starting line completely erases the reality of the women who are writing and organizing decades earlier. I mean, we were talking about early pioneers like Malika El Fassi.
Spot on. She was writing way back in the 1930s.
The 1930s. And she wasn't writing like polite society observations. She was tackling heavy systemic issues like rape and domestic violence.
Right.
And beyond her writing, she was the absolute only woman among 66 politicians to sign the 1944 document demanding Morocco's independence from France.
Which is just incredible.
You don't end up as the sole female signature on a foundational document of national independence by being silent.
No, you really don't. Her presence in that room was a massive anomaly, but she leveraged her elite social standing to, push through the boundaries of the era. And we also see Amina Liu, who published the novel Queen Kanatha in the 1940s. That was a stark early critique of polygamy and women's legal rights.
So they were definitely speaking out.
Absolutely. And the activism wasn't just limited to the written word either. Literacy was a significant barrier back then. So, the advent of radio in the late 1950s completely revolutionized access.
Oh, right. Because of Saida Layla.
Yes. In 1958, this journalist, her real name was Malika Meliani, she launched radio programs tailored specifically for women.
Which is brilliant because a voice coming through a radio receiver goes straight into the domestic space.
Right, bypassing the physical walls of the house entirely.
Yeah, she's speaking to women directly in their own language. It subverts that physical isolation, which I think brings us to the underlying theory of this deep dive.
The subaltern.
Exactly. If these women were so active, why did they disappear from the record?
Well, the paper leans heavily on a theory by Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak about the subaltern.
Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Think of subaltern as populations who exist entirely outside the hegemonic power structure.
Okay.
It's not just that they're oppressed. It's that the system is fundamentally incapable of hearing them. They don't have the institutional language or the platforms to be recognized by those in power.
So they're effectively invisible.
Right. Spivak argued that if the colonized subject is hidden from history by the colonizer, then the colonized female subject is the most deeply hidden. She exists in the darkest shadows of the historical record.
Wow.
And to counter this, another scholar, Brahim El Guabli, developed the concept of the other archive.
The other archive. I love this concept.
Yeah, it's the idea that when classical official archives fail, marginalized groups use fiction and narrative memory to unearth those uncomfortable histories.
You know, it makes me think of official history as, like, a corrupted computer hard drives.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's like someone in power essentially went in and hit delete on all the files containing the data about women's contributions.
Yes, exactly.
But what these authors are doing with fiction is providing the secret backup drives. These novels are the external hard drives preserving the raw data of what actually happened. They're just disguised as stories.
That is a perfect analogy. And a backup drive doesn't just save old files, right? It allows you to boot up the system entirely differently.
Right.
When you boot up Moroccan history using these novels, the narrative you recover completely shatters established assumptions.
Which is exactly what Fatima Mernissi achieves in her fictionalized memoir, Dreams of Trespass.
Yes. She takes the reader straight into the heart of the colonial era harem.
And right away, the young narrator in Mernissi's book asks a question that, frankly, a lot of listeners outside of that culture are probably asking.
Yeah.
She asks, what exactly is a harem?
It's the central question, and Mernissi answers it by completely dismantling the Orientalist fantasy.
The Western gaze, basically.
Right, the colonial gaze. Traditionally, European paintings or literature depicted the harem through a highly exoticized passive lens.
Oh, yeah. Always hypersexualized.
Exactly. It's shown as a place of sheer languor, where women are just lounging around completely detached from the intellectual or political world outside.
But Mernissi shows us something radically different.
She does. She portrays the harem as a deeply engaged, intensely political space. These women were not oblivious to the nationalist movement fighting the French occupation. They were actively debating it.
Wait. I've always been taught to view historical harems purely as oppressive prisons.
Yeah.
Like a place of total subjugation where women were essentially locked away from society.
That's the common perception, yeah.
But Mernissi is showing them almost like underground political action committees. Are you saying the nationalist movement missed a huge opportunity by ignoring these women?
Well, it's actually a darker dynamic than just a missed opportunity.
How so?
The male nationalists often utilized the silent domestic support of these women during the anti-colonial struggle. But then they deliberately suppressed their political voices to maintain patriarchal control once independence was on the horizon.
Wow. So they used them, then sidelined them.
Exactly. And the women in the harem saw this hypocrisy clearly. They were organizing their own internal resistance.
Like the debates over clothing.
Yes. There were intense debates within the courtyard over traditional clothing. They argued constantly about the fabric of the veil and the haik, which is the traditional long cloak.
Right.
As the nationalist movement grew, the women adopted the litham, a smaller veil, and turned it into a subversive political statement.
They started wearing it to political celebrations, right?
And to mosque gatherings across the city. It became a coordinated, visible sign of a modern, nationalistic female identity.
And the political debates didn't stop at clothing either. Mernissi highlights this incredibly powerful clash over education.
Oh, the mother's literacy classes.
Yeah. The mother in the harem demands to go to literacy classes that were opening up in the neighborhood. But the family council, which is led by this strict traditionalist matriarch named Lala Mhani, shuts her down.
Right.
Lala Mhani literally declares schools are for little girls, not for mothers.
And the mother's retort to that is a brilliant piece of Mernissi's literary activism. She fires back, "Who is benefiting from a harem? What good can I do for our country, sitting here a prisoner in this courtyard?"
That gave me chills. She's explicitly linking her own physical liberation to the liberation of the nation.
Exactly. She is pointing out the glaring contradiction. How can the men fight for freedom from the French while simultaneously maintaining the prison walls of the courtyard for their own wives and daughters?
Yeah, it's total hypocrisy. But here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh, yes.
Moving from that collective political awakening, Mernissi introduces a specific character who physically shatters the boundaries of the harem. We have to talk about the legend of Tamu.
Tamu is just a phenomenal figure. She's introduced in a chapter called Tamu's Horse. She is a war heroine from the Rif region.
The Rif region is northern Morocco, right?
Yeah, it's a rugged mountainous area that fiercely fought off both Spanish and French colonial armies long after the urban centers had been pacified. The Rif represents unyielding, fierce resistance.
And the description of Tamu arriving at this bourgeois urban harem is so cinematic.
It really is.
She crosses the frontier all by herself, clad as a warrior. She is covered in tattoos. She is carrying a dagger. She's wearing what the book calls aggressive bracelets.
Aggressive bracelets. I love that detail.
Right. And she is constantly horseback riding, swearing, and completely ignoring the delicate traditional etiquette of the courtyard.
She doesn't care about the rules at all.
Exactly. It's less like a culture clash and more like a frontline general, covered in mud and metals, crashing a closed-door, highly manicured cabinet meeting. It's a total paradigm shift for everyone watching her.
And it goes beyond just shocking them. Her presence redefines their very concept of power.
How so?
Well, the women in the harem realize that quiet endurance isn't the only way to exist. Tamu demonstrates that a willingness to fight, an undeniable inner force, could make a woman commanding and irresistible.
So she redefines beauty as something tied to agency, not just aesthetics.
Exactly. She becomes an instant legend within the household.
But the crucial part, going back to our backup drive analogy, is that Tamu isn't entirely fiction. She is deeply rooted in reality.
Right. What makes Mernissi's activism so potent here is that Tamu is based on a real historical figure, Qaida Tamu.
And she was pretty important politically.
Very. She was the mother of Morocco's first post-independence prime minister, and she defied tradition in massive strategic ways.
Like with her son's schooling.
Exactly. She pulled her son out of a traditional Quranic school to place him in an elite French mission school. That was a highly controversial, calculated political move that ultimately shaped the country's future leadership.
And yet, state archives on Qaida Tamu are practically non-existent.
Basically nothing.
The state didn't record her impact or her strategic mind. Her memory survives almost entirely in alternative forms, in family essays, in oral histories uploaded to YouTube, and in popular songs.
Yeah.
So Mernissi using a novel to immortalize her isn't just storytelling. It's a vital act of historical preservation. If the state won't write her down, the novelist will.
That is the ultimate function of the Other Archive. It forces the reality of female leadership into the public consciousness when official history filters it out.
Right.
However, Mernissi's book focuses primarily on the colonial era and the immediate struggle for independence. The lingering question is, when the French left and Morocco gained independence, did those invisible walls of the harem actually come down, or did society just paint them a different color?
Which brings us to the second novel analyzed in the paper, Mhani Alaoui's The House on Butterfly Street. Alaoui makes the argument that the harem didn't vanish at all.
Not even a little bit.
It just shape-shifted into modern contemporary society.
Right. Aloui's novel takes place in the present day. It opens with the main character, a privileged woman named Nadine, receiving an anonymous envelope containing a newspaper clipping about a single mother.
Okay.
And this seemingly random clipping sparks this intense journey of introspection for Nadine. It forces her to confront her own complicity in the invisible boundaries that still restrict women's lives.
And a huge part of those invisible boundaries is the literal erasure of women from the public sphere. Which brings us back to the question I asked at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The street signs.
Yes. Alaoui focuses intensely on the power of naming and geography.
She points out a glaring fact of urban planning. If you walk the streets of Casablanca, the roads are almost exclusively named after ancient male Arab heroes, poets, and explorers.
Yeah, the narrator even notes that Nadine had never once seen a woman's name on a street sign. I really want you, the listener, to pause and think about the streets in your own hometown. Think about the parks, the monuments, the bridges. Who are they named after?
It's a really eye-opening exercise.
It is. We tend to think of systemic erasure as something that happens in grand political treaties, but it is baked into the literal maps we use to navigate our neighborhoods every single day.
And that geographical erasure is a physical manifestation of a deeper linguistic and societal erasure. Alaoui addresses this through a character named Jamal Bidden.
He's the journalist, right?
Yes. And he discusses the violence of labels. He talks about terrible words that society uses to unload blame and trap people. Words like bastard, maid, dada, abid, slave, slut, homo, illegal, migrant.
Wow.
Yeah. These aren't just descriptive words, they are linguistic cages. They are designed to keep marginalized identities permanently subjugated and easy to dismiss.
And to fight back against those linguistic cages, Alaoui engages in her own form of literary activism by weaving real, historically overlooked women directly into her fictional narrative.
Yes, she explicitly names them.
Like Mariam Fassi Firi, who historically built the massive Andalus mosque in the 9th century, but is frequently eclipsed in history books by her sister Fatima,
Exactly.
or Chechena, a real-world pioneering activist who essentially served as a fierce advocate and mother figure for single mothers across Morocco. By naming them in a contemporary novel, Alaoui refuses to let them be forgotten.
But Alaoui's critique goes much deeper than representation. To truly grasp the modern harem she is exposing, we have to look closely at the people still physically trapped within it.
The invisible labor.
Right. Alaoui forces the reader to confront the legacy of slavery in Morocco, a legacy that operates hidden in plain sight, codified under new terminology.
So what does this all mean? This brings us to an incredibly haunting character in the book named Dada Amber.
Yes, Amber.
She is described as ancient, maybe in her 70s, maybe well over 100 years old. Even her official state ID card doesn't have her real age.
Right, and her last name, Dra, was entirely fabricated by administrators.
Completely made up. But most importantly, she is the direct descendant of slaves. She is the daughter of Dada Yakut and the granddaughter of Dada Yasmin.
This is where Alaoui's critique of the modern era becomes razor-sharp. Slavery was, of course, legally abolished. But Amber's entire life has been spent in domestic service to one single family, starting with the grandfather, Mohammed Rice, and his wife.
She never left.
Never. The unbroken generational line from Yasmin to Yakut to Amber illustrates that while a legal decree might have ended slavery on paper, the actual economic and social system of servitude continued without interruption.
That is so dark.
The women simply transitioned from being legally classified as slaves to being called dadas or maids, but the power dynamic and their inability to leave remained largely the same.
We love to pat ourselves on the back and think that passing a law magically ends an atrocity.
We really do.
We look at dates of abolition
Yeah.
and assume the problem was solved. But Alaoui is showing us that society often just rebrands the atrocity. They call it domestic help, and then they do exactly what happens to another character in the book.
You're talking about Jean Ba.
Yes, the Senegalese migrant maid.
The details surrounding Jean Ba are chilling because they are so mundane in the modern world. She works in Nadine's wealthy contemporary house, but her passport is locked inside a safe by her employers, lest she run away.
Unbelievable.
They physically control her freedom of movement, utilizing immigration status as a tool of bondage. And even more violently, Nadine's family arbitrarily changes her name from Jean to Zara.
Just stripping her of her identity.
Exactly, simply to make her fit the cultural aesthetic of their household better.
It's the exact same control exercised in the colonial courtyard, just relocated to a modern, wealthy suburb. There's a profound quote from a character named Nyla in the book that really bridges this gap between the past and the present.
Which quote is that?
She says, "Women's bodies enslaved in castles and fortresses to serve in the master's homes. How can we make peace with it without understanding the roles we've been made to play?"
Wow. Yeah, making peace with the present requires understanding the unvarnished history of the past, which is precisely why the Other Archive is so vital.
Right.
If we synthesize what both Mernissi and Alaoui are doing and what Ikram Bentala and Brahim Barhoun demonstrate in their academic research, it's clear that multiple perspectives are the only way to arrive at the truth.
Absolutely.
Literary activism isn't about fabricating events. It is an act of profound citizenship. It is an intervention against historical amnesia.
It's forcing the official record to acknowledge reality. It demands that we see the subaltern women, the dadas, the single mothers, the fiercely independent female warriors.
They were always there.
Always. They were shaping the nation, building the mosques, and fighting the colonial powers right alongside the men whose names are plastered on the street signs.
Exactly.
And the reason you should care about this is because the history we are traditionally taught is almost always just the history that the people with the most systemic power decided to write down.
It challenges all of us to look at the gaps in our own histories, to ask who ultimately benefits from this silence.
Yeah.
By filling those gaps with rich, detailed, unapologetic narratives, these Moroccan authors are handing agency back to the women who actually lived and suffered through the history. They are ensuring the backup drive survives.
Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over as we wrap up today. We've spent this time looking at how authors had to use fiction to correct the massive blind spots of 20th century history.
Right.
But what about the era we are living in right now? We live in the 2020s. It's an age of heavily curated social media, of algorithmic echo chambers, and intensely polished, politically driven news cycles.
A very manufactured reality.
Extremely. Every single moment of our lives is seemingly recorded and uploaded, yet so much of it feels completely fabricated. So what contemporary fictions being published today will actually serve as the truest historical archives of this decade for future generations?
That's a haunting thought.
Are we living in a time where the official record is so incredibly spun, so carefully curated by digital PR, that only art and fiction will be able to tell the real truth about who we were?
A fascinating question to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep questioning the archives. Because sometimes when you instinctively feel like the history book is missing half the story, you just need to know which novel to read to find the rest of it.